All started. Now, so you can see our title, Applying Wisdom to Addictive Substances, and I have the number 1, so this is going to be at least 2 parts. And in a previous Proverbs study, we discussed wisdom and alcohol. This was many years ago. So the last few weeks, we were looking at the church covenants. And I was wanting you to see the kinds of things that churches have talked about with the kind of restrictions they would put on themselves in their Christian life based on scriptures or scriptural wisdom. So I promised to make this, and you notice that alcohol was part of that in some of those church covenants, and I promised to address it again in our study this time. But I want you to notice, first of all, my change of title, Applying Wisdom to Addictive Substances. Now, when it comes to alcohol, conservative Christians have held to either a policy of absolute abstinence or very controlled, moderate use of alcohol over the last 150 years or so. I don't really know what the attitude was in the years going before the Industrial Revolution. There's various references in the literature, but it wasn't, I think, a huge issue in those years. But especially since the Industrial Revolution and the great potential for damage that machines can cause when they're operated by someone who is under the influence, so to speak, this has become a huge issue. Besides that, in the 1800s, especially in North America, I don't know about other parts of the world, but especially in North America, the alcohol use became so destructive socially of homes, of families. Countless stories of men who were working in factories and very boring, repetitive work. They'd get paid and they would go to the bar and they'd spend their whole paycheck before they came home. So that caused a great deal of problems for families. And that gave rise to the temperance movement. And Christians, by and large, Christians supported this to one extent or another. So it became an issue. So that's one thing. But in recent years, we have had another phenomenon in our society that has created an issue for Christians. And that is the use of formerly forbidden drugs. Now, in Canada, marijuana has been made legal by the Prime Minister for I don't know how many years now. I forget when it happened. That for anybody over 18, okay, you have to be 18. Now, so it's legal. It used to be that Christians would argue against it. It's against the law. Okay, argument is over. It's not against the law. So what do we do about that? In BC, all personal use of drugs is decriminalized. Okay, and it is interesting. I read a little history of this, and they, of course, at first they said you can't use it near schools, can't use it, various, and of course that just caused more and more problems. So now you can only use it in a private place. You cannot use it drugs in a public place. Okay, that's against the law. Now, this is our government. I'm not, I'm not in favor of that. I didn't vote for it, but that's what they've done. Now, the purpose of our study. So I'm going to point here that what are we trying to do with this? First of all, I want to teach a clear biblical approach to the use of any addictive substance. And then secondly, to equip Christians with wisdom to instruct their own children in the face of changing legal requirements. So you could say to your kids, don't do drugs, it's against the law. And that would be a scriptural argument. But what do you say now when it isn't against the law? And I think most people would say they see the destruction that drugs cause, and they would say, you shouldn't do this. Even a lot of non-Christians say you should have nothing to do with it, right? But we want a Bible answer. Okay? And of course, the Bible doesn't address marijuana. It doesn't address the the addictive drugs that we have considered illegal or wrong in our society for many years. So how do Christians think about this, and how do we establish biblical principles on which to operate? Now, I think there are many, many approaches that we can take in the Scriptures directly towards alcohol, because the Bible does mention alcohol. All right? And the approach that we're going to look at today is what we call the wisdom approach. Now, you might say, oh, well, but you didn't mention this and you didn't mention this. There's several passages in the New Testament. There's other passages in the Old Testament. I didn't mention those. That's on purpose. I'm talking about a wisdom approach from the book of Proverbs about alcohol. Okay? Now, we're going to take what we learned today and use the principles to apply it to marijuana and other substances. But today we're going to focus on alcohol, and we're going to talk about its use and wisdom approaches to alcohol from the book of Proverbs. That's what this study is today. So just an observation, most Christians are opposed to the recreational use of drugs, but some are willing to accept the recreational use of alcohol in moderation, even though the Bible has something to say about alcohol and virtually nothing to say about drugs. So these scriptures in Proverbs are meant to instruct us. So first thing I want to do is surveying the relevant passages in Proverbs. So I want you to categorize each passage as a positive or a negative reference. So we're going to go through, these are all the references I think that I can find about wine or strong drink in the book of Proverbs. Those are the only two words I think that are used in the book of Proverbs. I want you to categorize the references as either positive or negative. That's what your blanks are on your sheet. All right, so first, number one. Proverbs 3, 9-10. Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce. So your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. So, positive or negative?
Positive.
Okay, so that one is positive. Okay, next one. Proverbs 4, 16-17. For they cannot sleep unless they do evil, and they are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. Negative. Now, we should note that this is a metaphor, and he's talking about wicked people, and they are sort of drunk with violence, is the picture that they're giving. But it is a negative reference. All right, next one. Proverbs 9, 1-5. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed. Negative. Positive. Because look, she's saying, come to my banquet. This is wisdom. I've mixed this wine. See?
Verse 4, sir.
Pardon me?
Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. Verse 4. Whoever is naive.
Oh, whoever is naive, let him turn in here. So calling the simple person, simple. Pardon me?
I thought it's probably what we're talking about.
Okay, a naive person is a simple person.
Him who lack understanding.
Yes, he who lacks understanding. Come into my banquet, is what she's saying. Okay? Wisdom is saying this. So this is a positive reference. Okay, we're just categorizing right now. We're not talking about meanings.
Would you say, but it also says the wine I have mixed. That's interesting.
Well, the wine she's mixed, but yeah.
Because they would always mix it with water.
Well, okay, let's not get into details. We're just categorizing passages. We'll come to the details in a bit. Okay. Wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is intoxicated by it is not wise. Negative. That one's pretty easy, isn't it? Okay. Proverbs 21, 16-17. A man who wanders from the way of understanding will rest in the assembly of the dead. He who loves pleasure and will become a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not become rich. Negative, okay. Next one is Proverbs 23, verses 20 to 21. Do not be with heavy drinkers of wine or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe one with rags. Negative, okay. All right, then here's a long one. Proverbs 23, 29 to 35. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine. Those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things. You will be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a mast. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I will seek another drink. Negative. That's pretty negative, isn't it? All right, next one. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink, for they will drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all afflicted. Negative. All right, last one. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his trouble no more. That's positive.
Well, I think it's negative because
It's not saying wine is bad. It's positive.
I take it as like, I forget
Okay.
my trouble instead of-
Okay, now I want a note here. Note this. I put it in your notes. We aren't simply keeping score. We could say, look, there's 6 negatives, 6, and 3 positive. Therefore, we're not keeping score, right? Overall, the message of Proverbs is negative about alcohol. We're just categorizing it, though. And why are we doing that? Okay, why am I categorizing positive versus negative? I want to see if any... Huh?
A balanced view.
Okay, a balanced view, that's part of it, I guess. Any other ideas? Okay, so the reason is we want to give the whole Bible teaching. Okay, so most of you, if you know anything about me on this issue, will know that I am against the use of alcohol. But we have to acknowledge that the Bible doesn't always speak negatively about alcohol. So we have to think about that in terms of what it does say in those passages. All right, so the next one, now this, you might need to sort of follow through Proverbs here. This next section is considering why Proverbs speaks negatively about alcohol. So I'm taking the 6 that I've categorized as negative, and I'm going to go through each one. We're going to think about what it means. So, and they're in order, I believe. So I'm just going to read them to you. I didn't put the verses on the screen. So where am I? Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs chapter 4 and verses 16 to 17. Okay, for they cannot sleep unless they do evil, for they are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and they drink the wine of violence. So what is the wine of violence referring to in this passage?
I think it's mean that they're out of control with their violence. Like
They're out of control with their violence. Okay? So is this a literal or a metaphorical use? Metaphorical. Okay, so here's what I've got on that one for that answer. Wine of violence refers to the spirit that the wicked have imbibed. Okay, so the reason it's used, of course, because alcohol has a tendency to suppress inhibitions. So people who are committed to violence, it's like they're drunk on violence. That's what I said earlier. That's the metaphor. Okay, so it's not specifically about wine, but this is why it's negative. It's talking about the effect of this spirit on their lives. All right, the next one. Oh, I have a little question in my notes. Why is this an apt metaphor? I sort of partly explained it, but anybody want to comment on that? Sydney.
Is it referring to how when you have too much alcohol, you're not in control anymore? So you would just, like your violence would be unrestrained?
Yes, yes. So when you have too much alcohol, you're not under your control. Your inhibitions are suppressed. So when you are violent, your actions are suppressed. You're unrestrained, right? So that's why I think it is an apt metaphor. All right, so the next one, Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, it says. So what is that referring to with alcohol? I have my statement here. It refers to the what properties of intoxication? See if you can fill in the blank for me.
Deceiving?
Pardon me?
Deceiving?
Well, they're deceiving. Any other suggestions? You haven't got the word. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep on doing this. I'm trying to get you to guess my word.
But as a mocker, people can make a fool of themselves.
Okay, people make a fool of themselves. That's right. All right, so I'll give you this word, okay? Destructive is the word that I have. Wine as a mocker refers to the destructive properties of intoxication. And I think I'm going to stop making you try to guess, read my mind. It's too hard to do it that way. So let's go to 21, 16, and 17. This is, it says, he who loves wine and oil will not become rich. Okay, this refers to the attitude of the user towards alcohol. It doesn't mean that he's a drunkard, but there are some people who seem obsessed with alcohol. They're collectors of fine alcohol. They display it in their homes, right? So, morning.
Would this refer to what you're saying in the temperance thing? You know, like in our society, people are more affluent, but if you're so obsessed with it that you're buying it more than you're buying food or clothing for your children,
Yes, yeah.
It leads to poverty.
It does, yes. And people who are given to it, like obviously if you're addicted to it, you know, it can take over your life so much that nothing else matters. I should have put in the notes, but I'll mention it at the end. There's a book I'd like to mention. Maybe I'll mention it now while I'm thinking about it. It's called Alcohol Explained. The guy is, he's British. Can't remember his name. He is not a Christian, as far as I know. He is, I think he's a lawyer, which even, no, like that's even worse, right? Okay, but he had an alcohol problem. So he describes what happens to you when you drink, and why drinking makes you want to have more, even though you know you shouldn't have more. There's a craving that begins to develop. All right, Rob.
Is that William Porter?
William Porter, thank you. Okay. Yeah, did you read that book? I know I talked to you about it.
You mentioned it before, but I've looked it up to help.
Yeah.
In case people want to read it.
Yeah, okay, so William Porter, Alcohol Explained, okay? And it is, I mean, I don't know. I've never had any alcohol, so I don't know the experience. The way he describes it, I don't even want to know. I don't want to know. So anyway, so it's worth reading. All right, so next one. Proverbs 23:21. Do not be with heavy drinkers. Refers to the tendency towards poverty that comes with addiction. Do not be with heavy drinkers. That's the one that also talks about gluttons. All right, and then Proverbs 23:29 to 35. Those who linger long refers to the negative effects of drunkenness. And he talks there about they're swaying back and forth like they're on a ship. And then he says, when I will awake, I will go for another drink. He says that is that addiction. And that is, in that book, he talks about how people, when there's two different aspects to intoxication. There's the euphoria aspect, which is what people like, but there is also another aspect that you don't exactly feel. It reduces your inhibitions. I'm maybe not explaining this exactly right. But after the euphoria wears off, people often want to drink more so they can get the euphoria back. And then, but they're still actually technically impaired. They're still drunk. And so they're not making good judgments, and then it becomes a cycle. If you keep chasing the euphoria, you get worse and worse until you're absolutely filled with the poison. People say, oh, I just have a glass of wine with a meal or something. Well, okay, but this is how the whole thing works over time, as far as I understand it. All right, so the last one, it is not for kings to drink wine. Okay, so refers to the impaired judgment that alcohol produces. Okay, so we're talking about the negative. Why is Proverbs negative about alcohol? Well, it creates a evil spirit. There are destructive properties. It has an attitude. It refers to an attitude. It tends towards poverty. There are negative effects of drunkenness and also impaired judgment. Those are the things that we sort of summarize. Any comments on this aspect of it? So alcohol is painted negatively in these senses. Okay. Okay, so why then, or not why positive, but we want to consider the positive statements. Okay, so there's the 3 positive statements. Proverbs 3, 9, and 10. Your vats will overflow with wine. Here it shows wine as used as a metaphor for prosperity. Now in the ancient world, they grew grain, they grew oil, olive oil, they grew grapes. And so a prosperous farmer would have plenty. So here he's not talking about alcohol as so much as its use, but as to what it represents in his produce. Proverbs 3, 9 to 10. Okay, yes, Crystal.
But that could also be a negative, like if you apply this principle to drugs.
Yeah.
So the producers or the
Right, yeah.
source of drugs is making them wealthy, but it's not in a good way.
Right. Well, yes, that's true. And so this one he's not talking about. I think what I'm trying to say when it's used here as a metaphor for prosperity, it's just like an expression. In the Old Testament, it sometimes talks about the Lord blessing somebody with fatness. Now, how many of you think fatness is a blessing? Okay. Now, but if you back when I was a teenager, we used to get images on our screen of famine in Biafra, which was a very bad situation back then in the 70s. And you saw these poor little kids, skin and bones, starving, right? It was horrendous. So when you see fatness as a blessing in the Old Testament, you can see why the difference, starvation or fatness, which would you rather? Okay, so fatness. So fatness is a sign of blessing. So when we think about the prosperity of the crops of the ancient world, the wine and the oil and the grain, they were all parts of that prosperity. So the other thing, though, is Maureen mentioned culture. In the culture of the ancient world, wine was used always mixed with water. Unless you were trying to get drunk, you would mix it with water. And there's various ratios that are established in history that the Romans would use. Each nation had their own preferences. I believe the Jewish preference was 3 parts of water to 2 parts of wine. So I don't know what that means in how you divide that up. But the point is, it was always mixed with water. Now some people say that was to purify the water. In some cases that might be true. I've heard that repeated off and on. But other people say, no, there were pure sources of water. Well, then why would they mix it with water? Well, to extend the supply. You get so much of a growing season, you have so much product, it only lasts so long, and you've got to wait until the next grapes come in before you have more. So they would extend the supply. And so the culture is quite different. So sometimes when we're talking about cultures of the ancient world and trying to compare, we do have to take into account that their culture with wine was different than our culture. Nevertheless, they knew the negative effects of alcohol. All right, Maureen.
I just think when you're talking about culture, I don't know if you're gonna address it later, so when you gave us some more detailed teaching in the past, I think that the wine that we have today is made to have more alcohol than it would have been
Yes.
in the ancient times.
Yes.
And that they didn't know strong drink like we know it today.
Well, okay, their term for, when we see in the Bible, we see strong drink, we probably think of like whiskey and hard liquor like that. But they didn't really have that. That's distilled alcohol. And that didn't come in until the Arabs invented it in the 800s. And so it wasn't even around in the Bible times. So strong drink in the Bible refers to beer and drinks like that. Okay? So we do have to understand our terms, but what I'm working on here is just the wisdom of Proverbs today. So I'm really trying to, there's a lot more to say, and even I'm sort of straying off my path to say these things, but I'm just trying to hit the wisdom. All right, so the next one. Wisdom has mixture wine refers to the pleasure of banqueting with wisdom. Okay, so we don't want to say absolutely that the Jewish people didn't drink alcohol. They did drink alcohol in the Old Testament. Okay, it's quite clearly a part of the culture. It was a part of the culture in the New Testament. But so wisdom, so it's a metaphor referring to the pleasure of banqueting with wisdom. It's not talking about the value of the wine itself. It's talking about the pleasure of being close to wisdom. So it's not really a support, in my mind, it's not really a support for the use of alcohol. It's just a metaphor to speak about something else. All right, then the last one, give strong drink to him who is perishing, refers to the medicinal use of alcohol. Alcohol was used medicinally in the ancient world. Paul talks about, to Timothy, he says, take a little wine for your stomach's sake. That's a medicinal use. Now, we have better medicines today, but, I read about, people in the Civil War having amputations with no anesthesia. Whew. So they would often give them alcohol so that they would not feel the pain so bad. I can't imagine, can you imagine that? Guy sawing away in your leg and you are not out? But you'll die if he doesn't. A lot of them died anyway, but so there is a medicinal use. Okay, so those are, yes, Rob.
Slightly off topic.
Oh, no.
Prior to that, Horatio Nelson, when he had his arm amputated, made a decree that the implements had to be warmed up because he found the coldness of them.
That's right.
So painful.
Yes.
Not the amputation itself.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that was Horatio Nelson.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, and they were using stuff like alcohol in that experience too, yeah. But it was, I'm telling you. You read, sometimes history, it sort of makes you glad you're alive today, I have to say. Okay. All right, so I'm just comparing the two categories. Now, yes, go ahead.
Well, maybe we're looking at it in absolute terms, but I'm thinking even some of the drugs that I'm talking of the pharmaceutical.
Yes, yes.
They use alcohol to preserve a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that is also part of.
Sure. So like, for example, even over the counter, you can get NyQuil. That has alcohol in it, right? So that's a cold medicine. And so typically I would say that Christians have not been against the medicinal use. Okay, but there's a problem when it goes from medicinal to recreational. And I had a roommate in college who had a cold, so he was taking NyQuil. And his cold lasted a long time. And I think it was because of the alcohol. All right, yes.
Even some of the food we eat contain alcohol
Yes,
when they ferment.
yes.
So there is no point of using alcohol outside the body.
Yes. Yes. Well, there are a lot of different things to think about in this. What we're thinking about here today is just simply the wisdom of using alcohol or not. So Proverbs talks about alcohol positively when it's talking about as a symbol of prosperity or as a medicinal use. Okay, so that's the basic positive references. The rest of the references are warnings about the trouble it causes. Is that fair? Would you say that's fair? Way to evaluate it. Now, Marilyn, do you want to add something?
The banqueting wine, that
Yes.
was one thing of Jesus' first miracle.
Certainly, yes.
So he didn't produce fruit juice.
Right.
It was wine.
It was wine, and I've always taught that, yes. Okay, but we're not going to get into the Gospels. I want to stay with Proverbs. Okay, all right. Okay, so Rob?
I think in one of these, it does mention, Proverbs, it mentions new wine. Can you define the difference?
Okay, so new wine is not, there is no difference. There's some people want to make a difference between new wine and wine. There is no difference.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right.
Does it-
It's not grape juice.
Yeah, does it become grape juice? Or, I mean, start as grape juice.
Of course, it starts as grape juice, but the fermentation process starts immediately when the juice is harvested, because there's yeast on the skin. And the yeast is what it interacts with the sugar, and that's how you get alcohol. Yes, Julie?
So is it safe to say then that the kind of alcohol that was used in the Old Testament,
Yes.
the Bible, is the fermented kind of alcohol?
Yes.
But the one we have around now is the distilled one.
Okay, so that's sort of too, how shall I put this? It's a little too simple. Yes, okay, in the Old Testament it was fermented alcohol, yes. We still have fermented alcohol today, but my understanding is that the fermentation, the process they go through with wine now is designed to increase its alcoholic content. The distillation process that produces rye and whiskey and whatever else, vodka, that creates a very high alcohol content. Okay, so and then so there's a bit of both today. Okay, so this is where, and most of the time also people in our culture are not drinking it diluted. They're drinking it straight. Okay, Crystal.
Just a little observation I've made over my career as a nurse practitioner, that people who came to me who were heavy drinkers,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a fracture
Mm-hmm.
or a severe wound,
Yeah,
their healing took double or triple the time
right,
of a
right.
person who did not inhale.
right. Okay, so that's a good observation. Maureen.
I just have a question, because I guess one of the things I've always thought about the last one, the positive, Proverbs 31, 6 and 7, I've always taken it more as a negative, because it's saying like, give it to the people if they just want to forget their trouble and become unconscious with life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's more in reference to illness or wounds or whatever.
'Cause it says
So, but I want to move on. I do want to move on. Okay, so you can talk to me about it later. Okay, so because I got a lot to go through here. This is from the Health Canada website. Okay, so this isn't me. I didn't make this up. I just copied directly from their site. Okay. The acute or short-term risks of alcohol is what they call it. So acute risks are the harmful effects of drinking too much alcohol in the short term or on a single occasion, often referred to as binge drinking or heavy drinking. If you drink too much alcohol on a single occasion, you may experience these short-term effects. Okay, impulsive behavior, impaired attention, concentration, and judgment, drowsiness, aggressive and violent behavior, slowed reaction time, slurred speech, double or blurred vision, flushed skin, nausea and vomiting, frequent urination, impaired memory or loss of memory. So this is a short-term risk when you drink. Now notice they say drinking too much. Okay, so people say, well, I don't drink too much. Okay, we can come back and talk about that in a minute. I think that the question is, have you ever drunk too much, and how would you know the difference? Right? Okay, so then they continue with the short term. Severe alcohol intoxication can lead to alcohol poisoning, which can result in Stupor, when someone is not alert or responsive and has difficulty getting up or moving around, stupor. Okay, coma. Okay, respiratory arrest, when someone stops breathing or has trouble breathing. Death, that's pretty final. All right, so those are the acute risks. Now, chronic, long-term risks. Right, and so they have this. Chronic risk refers to the harms that happen over the long term. If you frequently drink too much alcohol, you risk some of these long-term harms. Okay, damage to organs, including liver, brain, heart, stomach. Increased risk of cancer, including liver cancer, breast cancer, throat cancer, stomach cancer. Okay, high blood pressure. Reduced resistance to infection, sexual impotence, decreased appetite, malnourishment and vitamin deficiencies, disturbed sleep patterns, anxiety and depression, including suicidal depression, hormonal irregularities, and infertility. So these are all the things that are mentioned on the Health Canada site as risks of alcohol. Now again, they say too much, drinking too much. I'm going to touch on that in just a minute, but part of the way I'm going to do that is through this. Further information from recently published studies. The safest level of drinking is none, says an alcohol study. Okay, the risks outweigh any potential benefits. Another article, I think that one's on about the same study. Dementia risk rises with any amount of alcohol use, new study suggests. Now, I was looking for an article, and I couldn't quite find it. I read just a few weeks ago that came out. I saw it in the New York Times, and they were, I don't think it's exactly the same study, but again, the statement was made that drinking any amount of alcohol is dangerous. Now, I think that the negative effects of alcohol use make it a very dangerous thing to make as a recreational item of consumption. I don't know how sure what term to call it. So consequently, from a wisdom standpoint, I teach abstinence. But wisdom about alcohol. All right, so I'm going to give you these. What are the possible approaches to alcohol use? Okay, so what would you say? I've already given you mine, so abstinence. What would be other uses of alcohol? Pardon me? Well, I'm not talking about that so much as how do people approach. I'm saying abstinence. What do other people say about alcohol use? Moderate. Okay, so abstinence, moderation. And what would be the third option in that same vein? No restrictions, unlimited. Those are the possible approaches. So what would wisdom say about the Christian position? So as I've said, okay, I think wisdom teaches stay away from it. Now there's other arguments besides wisdom. Okay, I think in some ways they are more conclusive. But here we're looking at Proverbs. Okay, remember Proverbs is wisdom literature. On balance, wisdom Proverbs is teaching us about life sort of on average. These are the things that tend to happen. Does that mean that somebody who drinks moderately is going to end up with heart disease or cancer or whatever? Well, maybe not. You'll see these stories in the newspaper once in a while. Somebody's 102, and what do you attribute your long life? Oh, I've had a glass of whiskey every day. Like, really? No, that's what did it? Like, that's, I think what we're teaching here, wisdom. There are dangers. It's absolutely clear that there are dangers. Now, let's put it, I'll give you a little illustration or an analogy. Okay, so when I was a kid in the wintertime in Alberta, we would play hockey in the street. Okay, and we were on a quiet street. Hardly anybody would come by except our neighbors on the way home from work. Okay, so the street was almost always quiet. So we would play hockey on the street, and that was fine. Now, guess what? In our town, just a few blocks away was the main street. Did anybody ever play hockey in that street? No. Why? You dumb kids, you're going to get killed. Okay, now, if a kid were to go out and play hockey in that street, he might escape. But here's what I'm saying with alcohol, and this is what I think wisdom says. You might escape, but the risks are there. And you have to, wisdom says, it's not worth it. There are alternatives that don't carry the risks. So don't do it on a wisdom basis. All right. Any comments on that? Yes, Addie.
Yes. We're trying to balance these two views and just trying to find like, the Christian standpoint on this. Yes, you talked about wisdom.
Right.
So Proverbs 21 says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and
Yes.
whoever is led astray by it is not wise.
Yes.
That's wisdom. However, 1 Timothy 5:23 says, do not go on drinking only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach
Yes.
and your frequent ailments.
Right. So that is what I would call the medicinal use. So in the, they didn't have any medicines like we have. And it that also shows actually that Timothy's practice was abstinence. And Paul's saying, look, you do have ailments. A little wine might help with those ailments. Kill the bugs. Okay, so I think that's what that is saying. So I don't think we object to, like for example, I don't object to NyQuil. If you get a cold and NyQuil helps you sleep at night, tastes awful, but if it helps you sleep at night, it has alcohol in it, you look at the bottle, then I'm not against you using it. Okay, I'm not against the medicinal use. And I think wisdom would say medicine, if it's used as a medicine, that's fine. All right, Gordon.
Applying it with wisdom, say with moderation. The trouble is, you don't have any wisdom. It's
Okay.
called impaired for a reason.
That's right.
Right?
Yes. Okay. So
Wisdom is impaired.
right. Okay. So people will say, well, wisdom, that means moderation. No. Wisdom means being wise. If something's dangerous, then wisdom doesn't say, oh, let's just play with fire and see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe nothing happens and you're okay. Okay, so here's another illustration. We used to, we had this playground in front of our house with all these metal equipment on it, which is totally not allowed these days. Okay? We had this swing that was probably 10 feet off the ground. Okay, the top bar. So my buddies and I, my brother, we would climb to the top of that swing because we're boys. We do that. Okay, we'd climb to the top of the string and we would crawl across from probably 15, 20 feet across, 10 feet off the ground on this pole. Because why? It was there. We're boys. Now, is that a wise thing to do? We only did it a few times. It was just moderate. Okay? See, wisdom doesn't equal moderation. Wisdom means it sees the danger, says, no way. Now, I think back, man, if my mom had caught me, I would have been dead meat, right? Fortunately, she was somewhere else. Right, Rob.
Well, and I think, just thinking about this whole thing, as everyone knows, I come from a non-Christian background. And for the person who thinks they're a moderate drinker, they're generally not. They're
Yes.
generally a fairly heavy drinker.
Yeah.
I've got friends and family that think they're moderate. They're not moderate.
Right.
They don't just have one glass of wine once a month,
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
And I've known, frankly, friends and family who have died directly linked to alcohol.
Yeah.
Now, that's the extreme, but what starts out as
Yes.
moderate, in some people, gets carried away. So
Yeah.
why go there at all?
Why go there at all? That's wisdom. All right, Tola.
Yeah, I think as a Christian, Bible should be our main principle
Yes.
of adhering to this
Yeah.
drinking of whatever. Like,
Yeah.
there are so many examples in the Bible.
Yes.
Like Noah.
Yes.
He drank
Yeah.
wine,
Yeah.
coded
Yeah.
wine, until he slept off.
Yes.
The two daughters went into him.
Yeah.
He didn't know.
Yes.
They gave back to Moab
Yeah.
and Ammon
Yeah.
that were torn in the flesh of Israelites.
Yeah.
So I think about, as a Christian, we should avoid drinking alcohol, whatever
Absolutely.
I drink or
Absolutely. I agree. Okay, so that is my position. And there's many, like she's mentioning Noah as an example, and the sons of Lot as an example, okay? And those are very good examples. Our argument today is strictly focused on Proverbs. But there are wider arguments that we can make from other scriptures. So I'm not trying to, okay, so, but what we're trying to do is partly, we're trying to have, think about what the Bible teaches about this subject when it comes to wisdom, and specifically with Proverbs in mind. And we're also trying to learn how to apply the Proverbs. But then the next week, okay, so next week, I want to talk about marijuana and other substances. How many of you can guess what my position is on those? Okay? Okay, so, but how am I going to get there? Because the Bible doesn't talk about those things. See, so that's part of what this exercise today is about. We're thinking about the Bible, the message of the Bible, and we have a message from wisdom that says this stuff is dangerous, and we don't play with fire. So from a wisdom standpoint, it's best not to do it. All right, Marlena.
It does talk about being sober-minded, though.
Yes, it does talk about being sober-minded, and that's another argument. Yes, very good. That's good. All right.
I think there's also a blessing for not taking all this, like the Rechabite children.
Yeah.
Isaiah went to them
Yeah.
that they should drink strong drink and drink wine.
Yeah.
But they said no.
Yes.
Their father told them not to drink, and God blessed them.
That's right.
Because of that.
That's right. That's another great example. Is that Jeremiah or Isaiah? It's one of those books. One of those books, yes. Okay, so we are out of time. So let's pray, and we'll come back to this next week. Our Father, we thank you for this time that we've had today. Lord, we pray for wisdom. We need your wisdom. We need your guidance. We pray that you will help us to make wise decisions so that we are living a life that pleases you, and we can honor you every step of the way in our life. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.